Hello, everyone, and welcome into Senior Living Live. My name is Melissa, and we've got a very informative webinar on tap for you here today. Now, one of the most common questions we've heard in regards to senior living and the pandemic over the past 7 months is it safe? Is this the right time to make that move to senior living? Now, every person and every situation, of course, is unique in making that right decision. You've got to arm yourself with the facts. And here to help us with that today is Dr. Jamie Brodarick, a therapist who has extensive experience in senior living. She will be here to break down the risks and benefits of transitioning to a senior living community at this time. And she will be available at the end of her presentation to answer any questions you might have. Dr. Brodarick, thank you for joining us today. The floor is all yours.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. And as Melissa said, we will be covering transitioning to assisted living, or when I say assisted living, I'm also referring to senior living or memory care. So I will go ahead with that and get started. I have a few slides just sort of to keep me organized and on topic as we talk about some of the key points. And I want you to know that we will have approximately 30 minutes or so after the presentation for specific questions. I tried to leave a large enough buffer so that any questions that you might have specific concerns that I could address those directly. So with that, we will go ahead and get started. So the first thing that I want to address is that navigating a transition like this to assisted living or memory care anytime is a very difficult thing for family members and for the resident themselves. No matter when this arises, it is a very challenging thing. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about first was this is a need-based and need-driven decision. People that require assistance with activities of daily living, they need some type of formal care services. And so, for example, I live in the state of Florida, and I know many of you are all over the country. So I wanted to show you what that looks like. And again, this is just in our state. So I'm gonna hopefully be able to open this facts and figures for you to show you what that looks like. Sorry about that. That link is looking like it's not opening. So what I'll do is I'll summarize that for you and maybe get that pulled up a little bit later for you. But essentially what this shows is that about half of residents that live in an assisted living setting actually need some type of assistance with an activity of daily living. So things like showering, getting dressed, grooming and hygiene, toileting care. Those are all things that a person will need going into assisted living. And so again, just to sort of, here we go, to emphasize that this is a need-based type of care. So here are the exact statistics, and there's actually on this webpage for every single state, so you can see if that looks different in your state. But I want to kind of focus here around the activities of daily living, just to give you a snapshot of what is needed. So 67% of people need help with bathing, 57% need help with walking, 52% need help with dressing, 45% need help with toileting, 31% need help with bed transfers, and 18% need help with eating. So in seeing that, it's really important for me to underscore that these needs do not go away. These needs predated COVID, and they're going to continue throughout. So that is a really important thing that I really want to emphasize, is that this is a need-based thing. The other thing that I wanted to share is that prior to deciding on something like this before COVID, on average, families would shop about between 8 to 12 communities, depending on where you live. So they really took their time to go in and tour and question staff and really try to understand what are all the options that exist out there. So people really had a lot of time to do their due diligence and their homework around this. However, that looks really different now that we're facing a pandemic. Communities aren't able to tour people in person sometimes, depending on the area that they're living, and may not have that amount of time to dedicate to doing that sort of shopping around. So the third thing that I really want to emphasize, and this really usually surprises people, but prior to COVID, in working in the senior living industry for over 15 years, one thing that I noticed quite a bit, but also there's research to support it, is more than 80% of the time, what facilitates a move to an assisted living community is some sort of crisis. So there's been a fall or an elopement where someone has wandered away and gotten lost, or the death of a spouse. There has been some sort of major life disruption or critical thing that has happened that has prompted this decision to kind of go ahead and move forward. So I say this because it's really never an easy time to make a decision like this, and that's why people wait as long as they can. However, if I can caution you about one thing, it's that you don't really want to wait for a crisis to happen, because then emotions are high, there's already a lot of stress, and it's just not really the best time to be making a decision like this that's so important. So I do really want you to know, again, over 80% of the time in assisted living, a move is actually prompted by some sort of crisis. And then the final thing that I think is really important to say before we talk about where we are now is that even prior to COVID, a decision like this was really challenging for most family members to make. Even if their loved one was either neutral or positive about moving into a senior living environment, families often would experience guilt for not being able to have, completed all the care needs themselves, and just really feeling like they were kind of falling short and needing other people to step in and help. So caregivers often feel a lot of guilt about a lot of things, and this is one of the things that mostly drives the guilt, is moving to a community. And then there's also this ambivalent feeling where you know that it's needed and necessary, but sometimes they have good days and clear moments, and that really keeps you sort of weighing and really undecided on, is this a good time, is this not a good time? Because on those good days and in those clear moments, you really sort of talk yourself into, okay, I think we have this, I think it's all under control. But then there's a bad day or a really hard day, lots of confusion, or just needing a lot more support than you have. And then you're sort of rethinking everything. So before we got here in March, this was what families encountered when they tried to set out to make a decision like this. So all of this is still in effect, but it's compounded by the fact that we are in the middle of a pandemic. So I'm going to speak to that a little bit next. Okay, so now before we talk about important considerations before moving into a senior living environment, I want to talk and speak specifically from a mental health perspective to how this pandemic has affected our seniors. And it's not any secret, we are all very aware that our seniors are the most vulnerable population when it comes to physical health concerns of COVID. However, what I think doesn't get enough attention, and maybe this is because I'm a mental health provider, is the impact that this pandemic is having on their mental health and well-being. And so I'm going to speak to some of those and give you some figures to back that up. So the first thing that I want to point out is that this pandemic has really exacerbated social isolation. And our seniors, people over the age of 65, were already the most at risk demographic for experiencing social isolation. And this statistic, adults that are aged 85 or 65 or older were more likely than adults younger to report that they rarely or never received the social and emotional support that they needed. So 12% doesn't sound incredibly high, but one of the things that's important to note is as someone gets older, this statistic increases. So here I'm talking about 65, but as you might have seen in that, that slide that I showed before, the average age in a senior living community is actually 85 years old. So we're talking about an older demographic. So social isolation is a huge concern for lots of reasons. One is it does actually contribute to increased cognitive decline. It also contributes to accidents and no one really knowing that the person is struggling with getting basic needs met. So their physical care, their nutrition, and then prone to things like falls or some sort of major event, and no one is around to really see that. So especially if people live out of the area. So I'm going to talk about cognitive decline, and I know that you recently had a webinar on the differences between dementia and Alzheimer's and the different forms of dementia that exist. So you're probably, if you joined that webinar, you're probably really versed in understanding how big of an issue dementia is. And just to give you a statistic, about 47%, so almost 1 in every 2 seniors over the age of 85 meets criteria for dementia. So that's an important statistic because you know that if someone is living alone, and actually 1 in 6 people with dementia live alone, then we know that with dementia, social isolation, stimulation is very important to maintaining quality of life, but it's also helpful. If you've heard the old adage, if you don't use it, you lose it, that is very true when we're talking about cognitive decline. We want to keep people engaged in conversation and engaged in meaningful activities to prevent cognitive decline. So that's really, second to social isolation, my biggest concern is about cognitive decline that happens with increased isolation and boredom, really. And so before this webinar, I was asked about, in the last 3 years, what are some of the biggest trends that I've seen from a mental health perspective? So I wanted to inform everyone what the most common mental health conditions are in seniors and speak to that a little bit. So the most common is actually anxiety, and followed by severe cognitive impairment or dementia, which we talked about. And lastly, mood disorders. So that's the third common. And when I say mood disorders, I mean depression or bipolar disorder. So these are the 3 most common mental health concerns in our senior population. And I think that this is a really important point to underscore, not to alarm anyone, but just to really emphasize that mental health issues are very serious. And in some cases, if left untreated or not supported in the correct way, it can lead to really extreme things like suicide. And many people don't realize that the the group most at risk for suicide are men aged 85 or older. They have the highest rate of suicide of any other group. So those things I think are very important to understand in, what causes anxiety and mood disorders in our seniors. And often it is related to the following things: feeling like a burden, feeling like they have no meaningful purpose or activities to engage in, and a loss of socialization with people they love, close family and friends. So compound that with anxiety about growing older, declining physically and cognitively. Those are some major sources of anxiety for our seniors. And then the final 2 points that I want to emphasize, because COVID, I think, as I'm talking about some of these things, I want you to understand how COVID has exacerbated a lot of these issues. So lack of access to care, food and services. So really, I know we live in an age of convenience. So, you can order Amazon, you can order Ubers if you want to. We have these resources at our fingertips, but for a lot of seniors, it requires them to do something that they're not either comfortable or knowledgeable about, which is to utilize technology in order to have this access. So because they may not know how, or they're not doing that, they do lack the access that they need to home care or proper nutrition and food and other services like transportation services. So these things I want to really, again, emphasize that these were already struggles and challenges pre-COVID, but COVID exacerbates them, because if you live alone or if you have very limited contact already, if you're living at home, your level of social isolation, your access to the outside world is greatly impaired. And to give you an idea of when there is cause for concern, and again, I'm a therapist and treat mental health conditions, I wanted to explain to those of you who may, your loved one better than anyone. So if there is any sort of change in condition, you will be the first person to notice that, either via telephone or if you are seeing them. And if you're noticing any of these signs and symptoms, my recommendation is that you take action and you create a plan. So we're going to talk about those different options. However, these are some things just to be mindful of. So the first is increased irritability or agitation. And so it shouldn't come as a surprise that when you are isolated or not stimulated, it's anxiety sort of overpowers you and can manifest and show up as being irritable and agitated. So that's really one of the first signs to look out for. The second is increased confusion. If you're noticing that your loved one is repeating themselves or seems more disoriented and more forgetful than usual, that's something that just to be mindful of, to pay attention to. Then you have increased paranoia. So these, this would constitute things like accusing people of moving or misplacing or hiding things, or really being suspicious of other people. That is a warning sign to pay attention to. Anhedonia just means a loss of interest in activities that you once found enjoyable. So maybe your loved one really enjoyed word games or trivia or whatever that was, but now you notice that they're not as interested anymore. That is anhedonia, and it is a sign of depression. Sporadic crying, so having crying spells that seem to be unrelated to anything specific. disrupted sleep. So I mean, sleeping too much is also an issue, and not sleeping enough, or having a really dysregulated sleep cycle where they're sleeping at odd hours, they're awake at night, and then sleeping during the day. So anything disrupted. Otherwise, poor hygiene. So sometimes this is related to not feeling well, or it can also be related to forgetfulness or just a lack of self-awareness, but it also can be related to having a hard time physically performing the care. They're just not able to. So you would want to find out why. Then you have poor appetite. So this can look like skipping meals or not getting their nutritional needs met. Same thing with staying hydrated and making sure they have adequate water intake. And then lastly, physical decline. Our elders may be not able to exercise and get out and about as much as they did. So remember, I was talking about if you don't use it, you lose it. That goes for both cognitive and physical. So if they're not given an opportunity to have as much physical exercise, you may see their muscles weaken and atrophy a bit. So these are all things to be on the lookout for with your loved one, and also even in yourself. I know some of you are watching this webinar and considering that. So the next thing that I'm going to talk about is what assisted living can provide. And again, when I say assisted living, I'm sort of generalizing to senior living in general. So I can also be thinking about independent living or memory care as well. And so the first and the most obvious reason why people seek out assisted living is it's for assistance with any activity of daily living. So any physical care need is provided and assisted from staff in an assisted living community. So that's the obvious. So the other thing I think about too, when I talk about caregiver guilt and not being able to meet the needs of your loved one, I want you to think about that in a community, there are 3 shifts and there are a team of people. The adage that it takes a village, it does, because you have someone to help with the activities, you have someone to help with medical needs, nutritional needs, then you have care staff. So you have a team of people who work in shifts to meet all the needs of someone. So that's something that one human or even a small group in a family aren't able to do. The other benefit of an assisted living environment are the activities and having a structure and rhythm to the day with various things to keep people engaged. And really, I think the 2 things that people seem to care the most about when they're shopping for assisted living include activities and meals. Those tend to be sort of the popular things that people care about. And a great activities program offers activities for your cognitive, your physical, and your social. So there's typically 5 to 7 activities a day with a wide range of interests to keep someone stimulated and not just watching TV. And then the next one is nutrition. And again, this is something that's really vital to physical health and well-being, is making sure your loved one has adequate nutrition. And all menus in an assisted living are approved by a dietitian. And if your loved one has certain nutritious needs, or if they're on a special diet, that is catered to. So in an assisted living environment, you get 3 balanced meals, snacks, and encouraging of hydration throughout the day. You then also have medical oversight. So most communities have a team of nurses staffed around the clock. There are on-call doctors who come into the community for convenience, so your loved one doesn't have to go to various doctor's appointments. They have people who come in to see them, and they're monitored to make sure if there's any change in condition or anything to be concerned about. That assisted living team is sort of that first line of defense. They notice those things. And again, I am going to underscore socialization a lot. I have a slide next that I want to emphasize and show everyone, but this is so important. There are always benefits of communal living. I'll talk about some of the risks involved as well in light of the pandemic, but the key is that adequate social and emotional support is associated with reduced risk of mental illness, physical illness, and mortality. So your loved one actually lives longer and feels better when they get socialization. I have a really compelling statistic I'm going to show you next that came out of research from the Blue Zones. And then lastly, to emphasize the routine, making sure if you have a loved one who is not sleeping at night consistently and they're just sort of not really structured throughout the day and not engaged or taking cat naps and just really not sure what to expect day to day, an assisted living environment really provides routine because there is a schedule and there's flexibility within that schedule, but it is really nice for people to have sort of a framework for how is your day going to look. It really gives you things to be excited about and look forward to. And as promised, here is some information. So some of you may be familiar with a book that came out recently on the Blue Zones, and what it essentially was about there are pockets all over the world where the citizens in certain places live to be over 100 years old, and they have a high percentage of their population who become centenarians. So they live past their 100th birthday and they have really great qualities of life. So some of the examples are Loma Linda, California, Okinawa, Japan, Sardinia, Italy. Those are a few that come to mind. So what they did was they studied the habits of these people to find out how did they age so well. And some really interesting things came out. So I'm going to talk about that in just a moment. But one of the things that came about was, so they looked at the common factors of these blue zones, and they realized that social interaction was actually the key, the most important predictor of longevity. So you see down here at the bottom that loneliness, so being alone, and there's a difference between being alone and being lonely, but loneliness is more dangerous than obesity and is as damaging to health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And so I thought that that was really compelling and significant. And again, this comes out of the Blue Zones research. And some other statistics just I wanted to share were that 43% of seniors, so that's over the age of 65, feel lonely on a regular basis. And 45%, there's a 45% increased risk of mortality for seniors who report feeling lonely. So their life expectancy is much lower. And then a couple of other things just to kind of drive home the point about the importance of social engagement and interaction is, so people with a high degree of loneliness are twice as likely to develop Alzheimer's or related dementia as people with a low degree of loneliness. So again, that cognitive stimulation that we get from simple social engagement and interaction is really critical. And nearly half, 49% of all people aged 75 and over live alone. And 9% of older people feel trapped in their own home. So these are some statistics just to be aware of and an important consideration, because people aren't for whatever reason, talking about this as much as they are about the physical risks associated with COVID and other risk factors. So in making that decision about whether or not a transition to a senior living community is right for your loved one, and also when is the right timing, here are some considerations that I would like to offer you as someone who has worked previously in these environments. I now no longer do, but I do visit with them quite a bit. I do visit these communities. So here are some questions to ask and really be mindful of when you're trying to make this decision. So one is asking about what are the precautions that this community is taking. So when I say precautions, I mean, what is that community doing to ensure the safety and mitigate risk of their residents? So for example, how are people tested and screened? So not just the residents, but also staff. You would want to find out that. You would also want to ask them about food handling, any sort of accommodations with the way food and activities are being handled. You would want to ask them about their sanitation practices and find out what that looks like. And then also social distancing, because activities must go on, residents must continue to eat. So how are social distancing standards being adhered to and practiced? And so that also entails visiting, which is the next point. I think that that's a big concern for a lot of families is, well, what about visitation? What's that going to look like? And that is something to speak to the community about, because really it's very important to communities. They want to involve families because transitions to communities go best when there is family involvement and support. So they want to get you involved. So that just needs to be figured out how that's going to look. So the visitation policy you would want to ask about. And then any modifications to programming. So asking what activities are still going on. I know one community recently, they have these apartments that all look out to a courtyard. So they had a musician come, everyone's sitting on their balconies, listening to this beautiful music play and everyone cheering for each song. So it sort of gave you the sense that even though you might be alone in an apartment, everyone's kind of alone together and joining in this same experience. So there's something really great about feeling that you're not alone. So the next recommendation that I would give is talking to family members who have recently navigated this and asking about their experience. So at times communities can link you with somebody who just went through this very thing, and maybe they have some wisdom to offer or reassurance that you could have in knowing that somebody else, because can I just say, hundreds and thousands of people are making this decision this month. And so you're not alone and you can talk to people about it. And I would definitely ask the community, are they open to coordinating that? And then finally, this is just a point that I would like to leave you with in thinking about the degree of safety and precautions that you are able to provide in your home. And because you can't fully protect and nothing is risk-free. So if your loved one is getting services in the home or having any exposure to anyone leaving the home, which as things are opening up, I know that that is happening. So you have to really consider and weigh risks with rewards, because again, in communal living, there is a certain risk that goes with possible exposure, but also there's really risk in everything that you do if your loved one is at home. So that is really what I'm asking you to evaluate, is what kind of precautions are you taking in the home, and whether or not the transition to an assisted living would allow you to keep that same level of safety and security. So just to think about those things. And before I open it up to questions, I just wanted to let you know we have a bit of time, so about 20 minutes, and would love to hear specific questions. And if I don't get to all the questions, I won't mind at all if you reach out to me via phone or email, and I can help answer any questions that you might have at that time. And I'll go ahead and open it up to everyone to see what questions I can answer.
Dr. Brodarick, thank you so much. Great information for this webinar today. As always, just fantastic a checklist that you created that people can actually use starting today to decide, is it the right time to make that move to senior living? Now, we do have a question from Charlotte, or it's more of a comment. Charlotte says, my concern is the amount of seniors that have died due to COVID who lived in a nursing home. So there is a slight distinction between nursing homes and assisted living or senior living, which is sort of all encompassing. Can you discuss that? And that is obviously a real concern for people.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So yes, again, as you mentioned, so there is a huge difference between a nursing home, which is really a skilled acute level of care, and the clients who are living in a nursing home need round-the-clock nursing care and a really high level of skill. It is a step down from a hospital. It is a rehabilitative, short-term acute setting. And residents that are in that setting typically, so just to give an example, there are certain needs that an assisted living can't provide. If someone needs tube feeding, or they're non-ambulatory completely, then they would be in a nursing home setting for rehabilitation. And as they improve and progress, then they would step down to a lower level of care, like an assisted living. So the nursing home population is extremely fragile and frail, much more so than an assisted living setting, and the population living in assisted living are much more stable and physically less compromised. So that's one component, is that yes, in a nursing home setting, again, because this is like a step down from a hospital, and so typically residents are there for 30 to 60 days max. And whereas an assisted living environment is where you live long term. So part of it is you are seeing a lot of that in the news media, that really these cases where maybe the facility perhaps didn't do the greatest job of containing COVID, especially early on before states got involved and government regulations started, and there were massive outbreaks. And so that creates a lot of anxiety and alarm because that was happening. So I would think, in addition to asking the questions that I asked about, related to what precautions are you taking, maybe ask the community, how many cases have you had? What protocols are you following to ensure containment? So that, I would say that would be what I would suggest.
Great answer. And for the Arbor Company specifically, if you log on to www.arborcompany.com, the very front page of the website has COVID information. And you can click on that to find out what all of Arbor's communities are doing to ensure there are no breakouts of COVID within the communities. I mean, you have, as you mentioned, Dr. Brodarick, the state level guidelines, and Arbor has gone about 10 steps above the state mandated guidelines to ensure cleanliness, to ensure that there's social distancing, that people are wearing masks. It is a very, very stringent, and you and I were both at an Arbor community last week, and everybody was wearing a mask and everybody was social distancing. And that is just the way it's going to have to be for a while until we can knock out COVID for good. But if you have any questions about that in particular, and you are interested in an Arbor community, feel free to log on to Arbor's website to check out those guidelines of their own that they are using on a daily basis. Great answer. We've got another question for you. This one comes from William. And he says he wants to discuss the issue of transitioning to assisted living and then being, quote, imprisoned in an institution by the pandemic. He says, I understand the need for isolation to protect the health of residents, but what are the patient's rights? Can they leave at will?
Yeah, so I can let you speak to what the Arbor Company is doing in specifics, but what I can say is the assisted living community, these residents are living in an apartment style setting. So they're beautiful. They have, bedrooms, a bathroom, kitchenettes, and they're very well equipped. And what I do know is that staff routinely go in, check on, visit with them, and they have staff interaction throughout the day. And they also, though, are able to, so I know some things, I'm going to give some examples of what I have seen communities do. So I gave the example of having a concert, everybody sitting on their balcony watching this concert. And then other times I know that residents are coming to the door and they're playing charades or trivia, or they're having, interactions where they're just coming to the door and sitting and they're seeing people. So they're still seeing people, but they're backed away and they're apart. And depending on the level of security or the phase that a community is in, communal dining is something that can happen with restrictions, obviously, about how many people in the dining room at one time. But I wouldn't say that they're in prison and they can't move freely. Other communities I know will, this is the memory care, will take residents one by one out to the courtyard for some time just to walk around or to have vitamin D, and then kind of come back into their rooms. So it's not like they're trapped in there throughout the day.
We have another question. This one comes from Anonymous. Are there geriatric care managers or other professionals that can literally handle every single detail of a move from A to Z, from Florida to an assisted living facility, say in the north?
Yeah, so geriatric care managers serve a very important function, and they can provide as much support to a family navigating this transition as the family would prefer. So yes, there are some local, and I know you guys work with quite a few. I'm familiar with many of them locally here. But if you're talking about facilitating an out-of-state move, that could get a little more challenging. They would have to kind of be willing to travel and to kind of do that with you. But yes, there are geriatric care managers. So here locally, I want to distinguish one thing. There are senior placement advisors whose job it is to sort of vet communities, narrow your options based on your preferences and your budget, and they sort of are kind of like senior real estate agents is what I kind of think of them as. So they help you find the right community for your loved one. But that's really where their expertise is. And so a geriatric care manager is usually either a social worker or has a nursing background, and they can help you with the other aspects. So here's what you say to your loved one, here's how to pack and downsize, and they help with all of that kind of stuff. But yes, they do lots of times they're either private pay, and sometimes depending on the credential, Medicare may have the ability to reimburse for some of the services, but it would probably be an out-of-pocket expense.
Excellent answer. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
The next question comes from Joseph. Any pointers on moving mom a long distance from assisted living, which apparently she has been in for 5 years, to more engagement in a memory care program?
Yes. So if it's within the same community, then I would certainly enlist the staff to assist you with those kinds of conversations. So I also like to know, without knowing, Joseph, your mom's cognitive level or ability, I think that you explain it as thoroughly as the person is capable of understanding. So if you have a higher functioning person capable of understanding what is happening, then you would want to communicate more information. And if that isn't the case, then less is more. So I usually, again, if it's within the same community, which I don't think that that sounds like what the case is, you would, because I'm sure this happens quite often in communities where someone is in independent living or assisted living and the dementia process progresses and they need a higher level of care. That happens quite a bit. And so within a community, a resident coordinator or services person can help you have that conversation and talk about the need. And so sometimes what that needs to look like is it can come from a physician, it can come from someone else, that you may have to come up with what we call like a therapeutic fib, because it can be really hard. So you might have to say your apartment needs some work, and in the meantime, we're going to need you to stay here in this location while that work happens. And then over time, they might acclimate and adjust, and it won't be a conversation about when can I go back, or so that I recommend if the person is more confused and more upset by it. But sometimes I think having a doctor or a professional say, you know, we're going to have to go ahead and have you at this community so we can visit you more. And here are all the benefits about why this community is going to be better for you. There are less people. You're going to get so much more out of this community. So I might approach it that way if the person is higher functioning. So I hope that answers the question.
Now, I do want to add, as we continue to get a few more questions in about making maybe that move, as this conversation has led us into senior living, that at least specifically for Arbor, they do quarantine new move-ins. So I did want to get that in there, and that is important for obvious reasons. Now, I do have another question for you, Doctor, and we've got about 8 minutes left, everyone who is viewing right now. If you have any questions for Dr. Brodarick, this is a great time to squeeze them in. So this one comes from Anonymous. It says, do you have any suggestions for how to get an elderly parent to move to an assisted living facility when they angrily oppose it? In this case, the person has cognitive impairment and even dementia memory loss diagnosis, but they are currently independent. They say that their parent also has severe hallucinations at times. What do you suggest?
Okay, so that's really helpful for me to know what level of functioning someone is in. And my recommendation is that cannot come from you as the adult child, because there's a certain dynamic there, right? They're still your parents, they're still the authority. And so I really recommend enlisting whoever that person has a lot of respect and really will listen to. So sometimes in some communities that's a religious leader, and others it is a physician. And I would be present for that conversation. So for example, if it's a neurologist or physician, they need to be the one that says, you need to move into this community. This is where I think your needs will best be met. And if you're talking about someone who has dementia, and it's progressed to the point where they're having hallucinations and they're out of touch with reality, less is more in terms of explanation. And so I would adopt sort of a validating stance and say, well, gosh, you know, I really wish you could stay at home, and I know you're going to miss being there, but I have to follow what the doctor is recommending, and this is what they're saying. So, you know, we're going to kind of see if you do well and do better, and, you know, maybe this won't be a forever thing. Let's just see how you do. So you want to kind of ease them into it gradually. And I want to kind of emphasize, I'm really a believer when you can to tell the truth, because that really fosters a lot of trust. But sometimes your loved one, if they're progressed in the dementia process, they are not grounded in reality. So it's futile to try and reason with them and, you know, use rational arguments with them. That's not going to get you anywhere. And they may even forget it the next day, and you might have to have the conversation over and over again. So that is when you really, I think, just support them emotionally that, you know, of course this is hard to move your home, and, you know, this isn't what you wanted to do, but we have to make sure that I'm taking care of you in the way that I was told I had to. So that's kind of how I would approach it, is having that, you not to be the bearer of all the bad news, you just to kind of come alongside them as they're receiving hard news.
And I have actually one final question. We have about 5 minutes left, Dr. Brodarick, and that is, have you seen maybe any statistics, or maybe just in your own practice, an acceleration of cognitive decline because of the pandemic? Say if you take these past 7 months and it was a year ago, are you seeing more of a decline just simply based on COVID-19?
Yes, I am. So I don't have statistics, I just have cases to offer, and probably in practice right now, 5 different ones that come to mind in the last 6 months were, so I'm sure many of you can sort of attest to this, that anytime stress, overwhelming stress becomes a part of your life, it exacerbates your mental health, and it also, you don't think very clearly when you're under a lot of stress. So I compare it to when someone has lost a spouse, for example, and some of my clients at some point have lost someone very close to them, so a spouse or a sibling from COVID. And so this has happened, and so anytime someone loses a spouse, you see an automatic decline, and then hopefully as the grief process, as they're able to heal and move through that, you see them return to a little bit of a baseline, not always though. So sometimes, depending on the person's cognitive status, if there's already dementia happening, a major stressful event like this can trigger a permanent decline. So yes, I am seeing, for different reasons, people are feeling very alone, and they are losing people, and they are afraid. So, and I think sometimes what fuels that fear is sitting home alone in front of a TV, watching sensationalized news programming all day long. And that does something to mental health. So physically they may be healthy, but what is the quality of life? And being in this field has really made me evaluate a lot of life things, including quality of life and what life is. So that's my answer to that. But yes, I'm seeing a lot of spike in mental health and exacerbation of dementia symptoms, a lot of paranoia and just fear.
Yeah, so you take what you feel, and for our seniors, maybe multiply that tenfold. So Dr. Brodarick, excellent information today. We thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us. And if you have enjoyed this webinar and you feel you still may need a little bit more information about senior living, you can head over to our website, www.seniorlivinglive.com. We've got a lot of great content there that you can watch anytime, anywhere. So as always, we appreciate you joining us and being a part of our conversation here on Senior Living Live. Thanks again to Dr. Brodarick, and you, the viewer. Have a great day, everybody.